Carrion is an action side-scrolling adventure game developed by Phobia Game Studio and published by Devolver Digital, who also published the last game I reviewed, Stories Untold. Phobia Game Studio is based in Poland but has members that work remotely all over the world. Phobia previously released their game Butcher, which in their own words is a fast-paced 2D shooter and a blood-soaked love letter to the cult classics of the genre that was well received. It looks interesting, I might check it out down the line. The premise of Carrion is that of a reverse horror game. In a conventional horror game, you play as a normal person or group up against horrific threats and odds in a frightening environment with little chance of survival. In Carrion, you are that horrific threat seeking to escape an unidentified research facility and your human captors. As for the game's achievements, it's not bad to 100%. You're looking at roughly 10 to 20 hours to 100% this game. More on this in a bit in the achievements section. Disclaimer: I do not like most video game puzzles. To me, they too often devolve into guess what the developer is thinking. I'm more of an action genre gamer that decided to start his YouTube review process doing 2 puzzle heavy games. I don't fucking know why I did this. Firstly, the music in this game is incredible. The credits cite Chris Velasquez and Maciej Niedleski for music into the game, but I believe the score by Chris Velasquez is what really drew me in. It's dark, textured, and goes a long way to establish the atmosphere of Carrion. It's good enough that I've been listening to it frequently outside the game, like when writing this review. In short, it's awesome. The pixel art has a visceral and vibrant feel to it. It's enough that I stare at most parts of the environment long enough I start to wonder about the backstory of that location. There's enough details to support a somewhat lived-in history with all the tiny pixel artifacts of life. The player controls an unidentified monster of unknown origins that is a writhing mass of worms, ravenous mouths, and eyes. This monster grows in size and ability the more people it consumes. There was something about when a monster grew in size and was flying through vents and passages that almost made me sick to my stomach. I kept thinking about my waste matter passing through my intestinal system when I did this, which in turn made me think about the wet pile of meat we are just contained neatly in a bag of skin. Carrion reminded me a lot of the body horror genre David Cronenberg is known for with such films as Shivers and Videodrome. Body horror being a genre of film that exposes the revolting reality and fear of being a product of a messy organic body. Just look at this, how this is so disgusting, how you're moving. You ever get like an upset stomach and you can feel like your freaking fecal matter move through your intestines and shit, like you get the bubble guts? When you have this monster move through these vents like this, like that's what it reminds me of. It's fucking disgusting and I love it. There will be 3 main things a player will be doing in Carrion: combat, exploration, and puzzles. The combat essentially boils down to grabbing an enemy and eating them, grabbing an environmental object or enemy and thrashing them out, or using some special abilities on both enemies and objects. The enemies aren't pushovers most of the time either. In fact, I had to err on the side of caution more often than not, as even a basic human with a handgun could mow the monster down in just a few seconds. So carefully considering my approach was usually an interesting series of choices to make. Should I be stealthy? How can I use the environment to my advantage? Since the monster's combat options were more physics-based than not, I did get a real sense of agency for applying my in-real-life logic to overcoming combat encounters. When the combat got really intense, that's the only time there seemed to be a disconnect between my intentions as a player and the actions of the monster. Or I could just be terrible at controlling the writhing mass of a creature. This disparity wasn't enough to destroy my overall enjoyment of the game, but I do wish the mappings between input and on-screen movement were tighter. The exploration in this game is light. There isn't too much rounding the next corner or going to the next screen to happen across some pixel art vista of epic proportions. There are sights to behold for sure, but most of the exploration in the game was a means to an end from going from location A to B and or puzzle solving and not much discovery. What was frustrating about the exploration in this game in general is that there was little in the way of signifiers to navigate one's way around the world, and this led to me getting lost and backtracking a lot. When I first went to this game's subreddit, the most common post I came across was addressing the game's lack of an in-game map. The thing is, not every game needs a map. Navigation as a gameplay mechanic is as valid as any other mechanic, and some players may find great joy in knowing that the lay of the land and using their own sense of direction to traverse the environment. Level designer for Carrion, Krzysztof Chomicki, I hope I'm saying that right, Krzysztof Chomicki had this to say during an interview with Oleg Nesterenko of Game Career Guide. The original Metroid didn't have a map, which is true, and it was totally fine and nobody complained. Back in the day, even games that did have maps still required you to pay attention to environment. Okay, going off this statement, the second part, he goes, the original Metroid didn't have a map. Again, I'll give him that, because I remember I played it when it came out, and it was totally fine. That's an opinion, and nobody complained. That's total bullshit. That is total bullshit. When I was growing up in school, if you were into video games and you knew a kid that had like a Nintendo Power issue that could actually help you through the game, that kid, whoever that was your lifeline into another world. That's how a lot of us figured out like how to do things in the original Zelda. Metroid, definitely. A lot of obscure games like Shadowgate, Final Fantasy 1. We didn't have the fucking internet to just look up the wiki. When you got stuck, you were fucking stuck. And there's some merit to that, right? There's some merit to that era and that design. But for him to say nobody complained, that is such bullshit. That is such bullshit. If you weren't some uber brain back then and you couldn't just figure it out, you're fucked. And you got stuck on a part because you couldn't figure it out, like the obscure thing the developer wanted you to do, then that's it. That's it. You were fucked. That's not to say that the design principle dictates there shouldn't be a map, doesn't have merit. But my counter to that is, if you want players to pay attention to the environment, instead of stripping them of utility that could help them navigate the environment, just make the environment that much more fun to navigate, right? That's my argument. That problem, not paying attention to the environment, I feel that's more of a level design or a world design issue than a utility / quality of life issue. If it was implemented as an option, right? Like you could toggle the map on or off, then that's the best of both worlds. If you feel that the map prevents you from experiencing the game as it was meant to be played, play with it the fuck off. If, however, you don't want to wander around aimlessly because you're not a navigation wizard, then turn it the fuck on. It's like with Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Those games being vastly misunderstood at first by the majority of reviewers. Demon Souls didn't review all that well because the game didn't explicitly tell you what to do. Those games didn't have any maps. But eventually a few people figured out what those games were about. To much of this, I agree. I absolutely love the Dark Souls series. If I keep doing this YouTube thing, I promise you there's going to be a ton of Dark Souls content in the future. I almost wish I could exist in that world. The thing is, if the Dark Souls character picked up a paper map or something like that that would exist in universe, that's not going to just thrust me out of the game. There's paying attention to the environment, and then there's pixel hunting every inch of the game to the point of statistical exhaustion. The key difference between Metroid and Carrion is that in Metroid, for better or worse, your goal is to survive while using exploration to drive your pixel hunting quest forward. The overarching puzzle was finding the spot you didn't interact with yet and hope that that is the next step. It was a giant yet simple task. And as obscure as some of these spots were, there was at least a sense that maybe, just maybe, that's how that world was really constructed. In Carrion, it seemed more of the exploration and combat was held back by having to solve Rube Goldberg puzzles on a regular basis, and it was just such a bummer. I'm not totally against puzzles, but in video games especially, they seem to be so utterly arbitrary the vast majority of the time. In Carrion, the real horror aspect of the game was realizing I was having fun with the combat, movement, and exploration, but all that was going to come to a screeching end when I had to solve Rube Goldberg puzzle number 5. You've seen by now in the footage the monster is just a mass of meat pulling itself around on its tentacles, right? Even as a newly freed monster at the beginning of the game, it's strong enough to thrash people around like throwing toys and mash a human being to its jaws to jelly in seconds. So it's reasonable to say that this monster, it's pretty strong, right? Let's take a look at this switch. Being that this creature is tentacle madness, would it be reasonable to bet that this being could flip a switch within its range that can be pulled by a much weaker human that it eats up, spits out, and eviscerates? Alright, well let's see what happens. Oh, that's right. Not a damn thing. See, you need a special tentacle to flip switches. It doesn't matter that this creature is strong enough to rip that switch right off the wall with one of those tentacles. You need the special flip the switch tentacle to flip the switches. So right away in the early parts of the game, I'm being told to discard some of my common sense to play another round of guess what the developer is thinking. If I move, look how far the tentacles go. and they're strong enough to pull this mass of nightmare forward. But they might be able to get away with it if like your little prehensile pod thing, your pseudopod you stick out was like a hand. You're doing some ghost in a shell typing, really required a lot of motor skills. But we're just talking about like, I want to put these tentacles on that switch. Look at that, it's literally going past it. You're telling me none of them have the strength or the capability to just push down on that lever. So I gotta, man, that sucks. That sucks. This vibe continues onto the level design itself. While the game is beautiful to behold from its industrial settings and vibrant fauna areas, the actual infrastructure, when I tried to make sense of it, it really seemed to fall apart at times. Okay, this looks a little bit more like a reasonable work environment. I mean, a little bit. Let's examine how they got to work. Okay, no, maybe not. So you're telling me for them to get to fucking work, they have to swim through this shit, hop out of the water. They have to hop. Tell me there's another entrance into this place. Nope. I mean, maybe these doors go somewhere. I mean, they would have to, right? All right, I think I can use the grates to my advantage here. There we go. What? Wow, that is a pretty shitty security feature to have, don't you say? All right, so guys, listen up. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have you guard this room, this area of the facility. But if the guy with the backpack dies, you all get fucking electrocuted to death. So make sure you stay vigilant. Make sure you pay attention, because if not, well, I don't write the rules. I just write the checks. So fucking, holy shit, dude. Come on. What a shitty security feature. And don't even get me started on the one-way air ventilation vents. But as just a consumer, nobody sitting here streaming this shit, one-way vents, kind of bullshit. Kind of bullshit. That screams to me like, yeah, we couldn't really think of a logical way to make this transversal system, this puzzle system work. So we just kind of got Rube Goldberg and be like, yeah, so at the secret facility, they have one-way vents where the air and stuff only goes one way. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude. It's just pure video game arbitrary nonsense. That's all that these one-way vents are. Like, if this game is going to have puzzles, so be it. But for the life of me, they barely make any sense. Too often the AI in this game felt like they were meat bags waiting to challenge a player, or roving health packs instead of living beings inhabiting a space they worked in or lived in. That doesn't mean they weren't challenging. I died plenty in this game. This also doesn't mean there weren't some AI that was actually living and working, but most of them were just, yeah, roving health packs and gunmen automatons. As for the deluxe edition, I felt it was on the steep side. $10 is a bit much for wallpapers, a small art book, and a very short comic book. Considering their previous game Butcher is also $10, Phobia is kind of saying that art runoff from Carrion is worth just as much as an entire one of their games. However, if they threw in the incredible soundtrack by Chris Valeska, I would say that's pretty fair. But they don't, so I would avoid the deluxe edition if you can. Alright, so Carrion has 21 achievements total. All but 3 of these achievements can be done through the natural progression of the story. Do the Cerebral Feast achievement as soon as possible, as it's possible to reach the end of the game and having killed everyone and have no one left to do Cerebral Feast on. Or just start a new game and do it in under 5 minutes. After the player completes the bunker level is the best time to complete any remaining achievements. All in all, this game took me about 15 hours to 100%, and despite me not really liking puzzle games to begin with, it really wasn't that bad. Resources I used 100% this game are in the description. Carrion won a BAFTA 2020 Best Debut Game Award. Steam Reviews has it sitting at very positive. OpenCritic has it 77 out of 100. Metacritic has it 7.9 out of 10. And this game sold at least 500,000 copies. There aren't a lot of reverse horror games out there on the market, especially ones where you play as something so utterly inhuman, a true monster. Carrion is no doubt likely to be part of most, if not all, the reverse horror and villain protagonist game discussions for years to come. That's not even mentioning its very unique movement system owing to a very unique avatar. There's little doubt Carrion has opened doors on mobility and game design as well. Who is this game made for? First and foremost, people who like puzzles. If you're the type of person that likes a little gore-ridden science fiction horror in your puzzle experience, Carrion should be right up your alley. Also, if the idea of physics-based combat because you're a many-tentacle monster that can thrash people and things about the environment, it might be worth your time to check out. You also might like the last game I reviewed, Stories Untold, which is a sci-fi horror adventure game with 100% less swarming mass of worms as the main character. Avoid this game if you're gamers like me, people who prefer action-oriented games like Prototype, Nier Automata, etc. If this game was free of Rube Goldberg puzzles, I'd have a completely different disposition on it, as I would love to just freely explore Carrion's world free of such contrivances. But I really don't like guess what the developer was thinking puzzles, and this game is chocked full of them. As fun as I did have with the game, I'm so eager to be done with this review and done with this game forever. Or at least until I fire up this game for a potential art study, because this game really is beautiful. Finally, if you're a fan of dark, atmospheric music, the soundtrack by Chris Velasquez is 100% worth checking out, whether the game sounds like your thing or not. You've been listening to it this whole time.